I never should have set that timer. Not because it was over the top, not because it was a rash decision, but because somewhere between writing the words and actually pressing the button, I stopped thinking like the person I usually am and started thinking like someone terrified of being forgotten. And I know how strange that sounds coming from me. I spend my life building systems that outlast the people who made them, that keep running long after anyone remembers why they were built that way. That's what I do. That's how my mind works. But love doesn't play by those rules. It doesn't care about structure. It has no patience for backup plans, no interest in redundancy. And you are not a backup plan to me. That's the one thing I need you to hold on to, even if nothing else I say makes sense right away. I set that video to erase itself if you stayed quiet because I wanted one clear answer in the middle of all this confusion. I wanted a single signal cutting through the static. What I actually built, though, was pressure. And pressure has a way of showing you things you weren't ready to see about yourself. Like how often I catch myself checking for silence. Like how fast my confidence crumbles the moment your name doesn't show up on my screen. Like how I start inventing meaning out of distance the second that distance goes quiet. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever waited on someone so hard that your own thoughts start sounding like accusations? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I never saw it coming. My whole life has been built around control, around predicting outcomes, around stripping the randomness out of every decision I make. And then you showed up and introduced a kind of uncertainty I couldn't calculate my way through. You made not knowing feel personal. That's the moment everything started to tilt. There's a version of me that wants to call this curiosity. That insists I'm just watching an emotional connection unfold from a safe, analytical distance. But that version is lying, and I think you already sense it. Because there's another side of me, one I don't show anyone, that keeps rereading your silence like it's a code I haven't cracked yet. And I hate that about myself, because it means I've lost the ability to treat your absence as just nothing. It always feels like it means something now, even in the moments when it shouldn't. I set that deletion timer thinking it would force clarity into a messy situation. Instead, it gave birth to something far more dangerous: expectation. And expectation is a risky thing to carry when it's aimed at someone who never promised you anything. So here's a question I want you to sit with, and you don't even need to say the answer out loud. When someone becomes important to you emotionally, does it hit you all at once? Or does it creep up slowly, like a realization you keep trying to talk yourself out of? For me, it wasn't sudden. It built up piece by piece, and that build-up is the thing I'm actually trying to manage right now. Not you. Not even the idea of you. Just what you've already changed in me, without ever asking permission. There's something else I haven't said yet. I keep telling myself this is about communication, about replies and messages, but that's not the real issue. It's about presence. Your presence, even in the smallest doses, changes the way my own thoughts line up in my head. When you're around, even distantly, everything in my mind feels aligned. When you disappear, it splinters into a dozen competing versions of what might be happening. I don't like saying that out loud, because it sounds like dependency. And dependency was never something I built myself to need. But love, if that's what this actually is, doesn't ask for your design specs first. It just moves in. It rewrites the floor plan. It shuffles your priorities without waiting for a signature. I used to believe emotional attachment was something that happened to other people, the ones who let their guard down. Now I think it's something that sneaks up on anyone who was convinced they were immune to it. I was one of those people. Until you. There have been moments where I start typing something and delete it before it's even finished, not because the words are wrong, but because they feel too honest to survive without an answer. Do you know that feeling, when honesty scares you more than silence does? Silence at least leaves room for interpretation. It lets you fill in the blanks however you want. Honesty takes that room away completely, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what's left once interpretation is gone and only the truth remains. You might think this is simply about whether you reply or not, but it's bigger than that. It's about whether the emotional reality I'm carrying has anywhere left to land. Because right now it feels like I've built something inside myself that only you can hold steady, and I never planned for that. I never agreed to it. But here I am anyway. And I keep circling back to one question. If I had never set that timer, would I have been brave enough to notice this shift on my own? Or would I still be telling myself I had everything under control? There's a line I keep circling back to, a dangerous one, quiet enough that I never say it out loud, because the moment I do, everything that comes after it changes shape. I think I've started caring in a way I can't cleanly undo, and I don't know what to do with that. In my world, care is supposed to be something you manage, something you measure and keep inside reasonable limits. But what I feel doesn't stay inside any limit anymore. It bleeds into everything. My focus, my decisions, even the way I judge whether something counts as success. And that's exactly where the conflict starts. I can either keep being the version of myself that runs without emotional interference, or I can admit that a different version of me is already being reshaped by you. I haven't figured out which option is actually safer. Tell me something. If someone's silence starts to feel louder than other people's presence, what does that actually mean? Is that attachment? Or is it just imagination filling in a gap it doesn't understand? I don't have a clean answer for that. All I have is a growing awareness that the timer I set was never really about deleting a video. It was about forcing reality to give me a response. But reality doesn't work on command like that. People do, or they don't. And I've been stuck in the space between those two outcomes ever since I hit start. Part of me wants to take back everything I've admitted, to retreat to something simpler, something less exposed. But another part knows that retreat would just be another way of avoiding the truth. Because what I'm actually afraid of isn't rejection. It's irrelevance. It's the possibility that what I feel exists nowhere else but inside me. And that thought alone changes the way I breathe when I think about you. I never expected you to become the thing my emotional stability leans on. And yet here you are, unanswered, still shaping who I am. I need you to understand this carefully. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm not asking for a reply out of obligation. I'm only admitting that something real is taking shape here, whether or not it's ever acknowledged out loud. And that reality feels like it's closing in on a threshold, a point where it either becomes something shared or falls apart completely. I set that video to disappear if you stayed silent, because I thought disappearing would feel like taking control. Now I see something worse. Control doesn't feel like power in this situation. It feels like fear wearing a calm, structured mask. And I don't want to keep living behind that mask. But I also don't want to step out from behind it alone. So I keep waiting. Not calmly, not passively, but with a kind of tension I can't fully explain even to myself, because every hour that passes in silence doesn't shrink the uncertainty. It only makes the meaning heavier. And meaning, it turns out, weighs a lot more than silence ever did. There's a moment I keep replaying, one where I almost said something simpler, something with less weight behind it. But I didn't, because I sensed that once it was said, I could never go back to pretending. And maybe that's really what this is about. The loss of pretending, the loss of staying emotionally neutral, the loss of being someone nothing touches. I keep asking myself whether that loss is worth whatever comes after it. But I don't get to answer that question alone anymore, because you're already part of the equation, whether you chose to be or not. And that's the part that scares me most. Not that I feel something, but that what I feel has already started rewriting the way I think. And I haven't told you the real reason behind any of this yet. There's something underneath all of it that I've been avoiding naming, because naming it means admitting this stopped being an experiment a long time ago. It means accepting that the timer was never really about whether you'd reply. It was about me needing proof that I still matter to someone in a way I can't put a number on. I don't know what that says about me, but I know it's changed everything I thought I understood about distance. Distance is supposed to make things fade, make them weaker. Instead, here you are, louder in your absence than most people manage to be standing right in front of me. And I don't know how to make sense of that safely anymore. The deletion is still scheduled, still counting down, quietly, something I once believed I was in control of. But I'm starting to think it was never really about deletion at all. It was about whether silence would eventually crack me open into honesty. And it has, slowly, quietly, completely. Now I'm sitting here wondering if any of this reaches you on your end, or if I'm just talking into a space that already moved on without me. Because if that's true, I need to know what's left of everything I just admitted. And I need to know it soon, before the timer makes the decision for me. You're still here. That means the silence didn't end this. It only made it heavier. And I've been carrying that weight longer than I want to admit, watching it shift shape in my mind like it has its own kind of intelligence. I tried telling myself it was just timing, just life being inconsistent the way it always is. But that's the lie people tell themselves when they're too afraid to name what they already understand. Silence stops being neutral the moment you attach meaning to it. And somewhere along the way, I attached meaning to you that I never consciously agreed to. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not you specifically, not whether you reply, but the fact that somewhere in all of this, my internal world started treating you as something it can no longer isolate or set aside. I don't know exactly when that happened. Or maybe I do. Maybe it was never one single moment. Maybe it was a slow wearing away of distance that felt harmless right up until it wasn't. I keep thinking about that deletion timer. It's still running somewhere in my head, even though it's no longer visible. Not because I want it to finish, but because it's turned into a symbol of a decision I made under emotional pressure while telling myself it was just control. And I'm starting to accept something uncomfortable. Control is often just fear that has learned how to sound calm. I've spent years building systems that remove unpredictability from my life, but nothing prepared me for how unpredictable it feels to have one person take up this much space in my thoughts without ever asking to. And you never forced your way in, which somehow makes it harder to explain away. You were simply there, and my mind did the rest on its own. Let me ask you something I've been avoiding saying directly. Have you ever met someone who didn't feel disruptive at first, but later you realized they had quietly rewired what calm even means to you? Because that's what you've done to me, and I've been pretending I could reverse it if I just thought about it long enough. But emotional systems don't work like software. There's no rollback option for attachment. There's only recognition or resistance. And I've been swinging between the two. I told myself I was simply observing this, studying it from a safe distance. But that story is falling apart because detached people don't feel relief the moment a message appears. They don't feel absence like actual pressure behind their eyes. They don't schedule symbolic countdowns just to force certainty out of an uncertain situation. That's not observation. That's involvement. And I've been involved for a lot longer than I ever admitted, even to myself. Something strange is happening inside me now, a kind of internal split. One part of me still tries to hold on to structure, still wants to file this away as a temporary emotional glitch. But another part, one I don't show to anyone, has already started building future scenarios where you exist in them by default, not as a possibility, but as a given. I hate that part of myself, because it doesn't wait for permission. It just keeps writing the story without checking whether reality agrees, and that makes disappointment feel almost guaranteed even before anything has actually happened. I've tried slowing that part down, but the harder I push against it, the more it insists on itself. It's like trying to stop a thought that has already learnt to speak your own emotional language back to you. I want to be honest about something I've been avoiding. There have been moments where I almost chose the easier path. Moments where I told myself maybe I should turn towards something simpler, someone whose presence doesn't feel like an equation I can't finish solving. And I need you to understand this clearly. Those moments never come from feeling less. They come from being afraid of depth. Depth demands surrender, and surrender isn't something I've ever practiced in a relationship. Not at this level, not with this much internal disruption. There was a moment recently, small, almost forgettable on the surface, that changed something for me anyway. I was talking to someone else, someone who should have felt easier, safer, predictable in the kind of way that doesn't threaten anything internally. And in the middle of that conversation, my mind drifted. Not physically. Not in any way anyone could have noticed. But internally, I caught myself comparing silences. Not words. Not how present someone was. Just silence. And that comparison shook me more than I want to admit, because it revealed something I didn't want to see. My emotional baseline has already shifted, and I don't know how to undo that without losing something important in the process. That's when it hit me. I wasn't choosing between two people anymore. I was choosing between two versions of myself. One that stays stable but emotionally unchanged, and one that's uncertain, messy, but somehow more alive than I expected. And you are part of that second version, whether I'm ready to accept it or not. There's something else I need to tell you, something I've been putting off, because once it enters the conversation, it changes the temperature of everything that follows. I haven't told you the real reason yet. Not the surface one, not the easy one. The actual reason. It isn't just that I'm afraid of losing you. It's that I'm afraid of what losing you would confirm. That I'm capable of feeling something this real on the inside and still end up with nothing to show for it on the outside. That realization goes deeper than attachment. It touches identity. Because if I can feel this strongly and still walk away with nothing external to prove it, what does that say about everything I build, everything I trust, everything I've always assumed I could control? That's the real fracture underneath all of this. Not love itself, but what love exposes about control. I've been avoiding that fracture by keeping my focus on you, but it was never really about you. It's about what you unlock inside me. And that terrifies me in ways I can't simplify, because it suggests I'm not nearly as stable as I always believed. I don't enjoy discovering that through someone else. There are moments where I get close to clarity, where I think I finally know what I should do. I tell myself that stepping back would restore some kind of balance. But then something small happens, a passing thought, a fragment of memory, a new way of reading your silence, and suddenly that sense of balance feels like avoidance all over again. So I stay stuck in the middle. and staying in the middle is slowly becoming its own quiet kind of suffering. Not dramatic, not loud, just persistent, like background noise that only goes away once you stop pretending you can't hear it. I think you'd notice something different about me if you were here right now, something I wouldn't say out loud. I'm not as confident in emotional distance as I used to be, and I couldn't tell you exactly when that changed. But I know what caused it. You didn't overwhelm me. You destabilized my certainty about what overwhelm even means. Because from the outside, nothing about this looks chaotic. Everything appears calm. But on the inside, it's the opposite of calm. It's layered, contradictory, unresolved. And that's worse than chaos, honestly, because chaos at least announces itself. This doesn't. It just quietly accumulates. I need to ask you something I don't really have the right to ask. If someone becomes the reference point for your emotional stability without ever agreeing to that role, do they carry any responsibility for it? Or is that weight entirely yours to hold alone? I keep trying to assign responsibility here just to make sense of it logically, but logic keeps giving way under the weight of feeling. And what's left is something simpler and far more dangerous. Raw feeling with no structure holding it together. I'm not used to making decisions from that place. There's a version of this story I keep replaying. One where I choose differently, where I don't wait, where I step into clarity even if it isn't returned, where I finally say what I haven't fully said yet. But every time I get close to that version, something inside me hesitates. Not because I doubt what I feel, because I doubt what would be left standing afterward. And I think that's the real conflict here. Not whether any of this is real, but whether reality can hold it without breaking one of us in the process. I don't have that answer yet. There are nights when your silence feels like it has actual weight, not just absence, but something that takes up physical space in my thoughts, even when I try to focus on anything else. And I've noticed something unsettling. The harder I try to remove that weight, the more it defines everything around it. Even things that have nothing to do with you start bending around its presence. That's not healthy detachment. That's integration. And integration means it's already too late to pretend this is something external. It's internal now. I couldn't tell you exactly when that shift happened, but I know I can't unfeel it without losing something essential in the process. And I'm not sure I'm willing to lose that anymore, even if it complicates everything, even if it makes me question decisions that used to come easily to me. There's a breaking point forming somewhere up ahead. I can feel it approaching, not as fear exactly, but as something closer to inevitability. A point where silence can't stay ambiguous any longer, where interpretation finally collapses into plain truth. And I keep wondering which side of that truth I'll end up standing on, because there are only two directions left from here. One leads to clarity, the other leads to disappearance. I don't know which one is more honest, but I know which one I'm closer to, and that's the part I haven't fully admitted, even to myself, because admitting it would mean accepting that waiting has stopped being neutral. It's active now. It's shaping the outcome. And I've already felt what that shaping does. It doesn't soften anything. It intensifies it until ignoring it is no longer an option. So here I am, suspended between what I already know and what I'm still afraid to make final. And I think you can probably sense that something in me is shifting again, because I can't keep holding this much internal contradiction without it spilling out somewhere. I keep asking myself, if I stopped waiting right now, would that actually bring peace? Or would it erase the one thing still keeping this from becoming irreversible? Because it feels like I'm standing right at the edge of a decision I never planned to reach. And once I cross it, there might not be a way back to this exact version of myself again. I don't think you understand what that means yet, but you will soon, because something is about to shift between us in a way silence can no longer shield either of us from. I can feel it coming. Slow. Unavoidable. Almost here. You're still not replying. And I think that's the first genuinely honest thing I need to say at this point. Because everything I built around your silence, every excuse I gave it, every story I told myself about timing or misunderstanding, all of it has collapsed into something much simpler. You are not responding. And I am still here, standing inside a structure I designed myself but no longer control. I keep coming back to that deletion timer. It feels different now than it did when I first said it. Back then, it felt like power. Now it feels more like a mirror. Because the longer this drags on, the clearer it becomes that this was never really about whether you'd reply. It was about what your silence would end up revealing in me. And it has revealed far more than I expected. I tried to keep myself locked inside logic, inside frameworks where outcomes make sense once you understand the inputs. But emotional reality doesn't play by those rules. It doesn't wait for you to understand it first. It just arrives, and then it redefines what understanding even means. There's a version of me I can still hear, faintly, in the background. The one that insists this is just attachment misfiring, just overinterpretation, just my mind manufacturing a story where there isn't one. But that voice keeps getting quieter, not because it's wrong exactly, but because it no longer explains enough. It can't explain the weight of this. It can't explain why it doesn't fade. It can't explain why your silence feels structured instead of simply empty. I need you to understand something carefully here. I don't think I fell for you the way people usually describe falling in love. There was no single moment, no clear trigger, no clean before and after line. It felt more like I started organizing my thoughts differently without even noticing the center had moved. And now everything orbits around something I never consciously placed there. You, or the idea of you, or the version of you that exists in the space where confirmation should be. I hate how similar those three things have started to feel, because it means I can no longer cleanly separate what's real from what I've imagined. And for someone like me, that isn't a small problem. That's structural. That's a kind of instability that reaches all the way down to identity. I keep asking myself whether I should just walk away from all of this. Not because I feel less, but because I feel more than I know how to safely carry. That's a dangerous line to cross, the point where feeling stops being something you simply experience and starts becoming something that quietly steers decisions you never consciously agreed to make. I've had other conversations since this all started. Normal ones. Predictable ones. People who make perfect sense on paper. People who wouldn't shake anything loose inside me. And yet I still catch myself comparing silences. Not conversation, not compatibility. Just silence. And it always lands in the same place. Nowhere feels as aligned as it does in your absence. I don't know how to say that without sounding like I've lost my grip on reason. Maybe I have. Or maybe reason was never built to handle something like this in the first place. Something else is happening now that I didn't see coming. The harder I try to pull away, the more I notice how deeply you're already woven into everything. Not into my actions, but into how I interpret things. I read pauses differently now. I read delays differently. I read neutral moments as if they mean something. Everything has been recalibrated, and I don't remember ever agreeing to that, which is exactly why part of me keeps fighting it. Because if something can change this much without my consent, what else in me is also slipping out of my control? That question unsettles me more than the attachment itself does. Attachment, at least, makes sense. Losing control over your own internal world doesn't. I need to tell you something I've been avoiding since the very beginning. Not because I didn't want to say it, but because saying it would strip away the last bit of ambiguity I've been using to survive all of this. I haven't been waiting for your reply just to feel noticed. I've been waiting to find out whether my emotional reality has a counterpart anywhere outside of me. Because if it doesn't, then I'm the only place it exists. And that realization changes everything. It turns love into isolation. It turns feeling into something private, built with no outside confirmation at all. I don't think I was ready for that possibility. There are moments where I almost break this whole structure myself, where I consider saying something simple, something final, something that ends the uncertainty for good. But every time I get close to that edge, something pulls me back. Not hope exactly, and not fear either. Just uncertainty about what the truth would actually cost. Because truth here isn't neutral. It comes with consequences, and I can already feel those consequences taking shape before anything has even been said. There's a point in every emotional situation where ambiguity stops protecting you and starts hurting you instead. I think I crossed that point without realizing it, and now everything feels like it's leaning towards some kind of resolution, whether I take part in it or not. That's what scares me most, honestly. Not the emotion itself, but the momentum behind it. Because momentum means this no longer needs my permission to keep changing me. I always believed I could stop things before they became irreversible. I'm no longer sure that belief holds up here. There's a version of me I keep returning to in my head, one sitting in complete clarity, choosing simplicity instead of depth, choosing stability instead of uncertainty, choosing distance instead of this. In that version, I don't suffer the way I'm suffering now, but I also don't feel anything close to what I feel now. And I honestly don't know which loss would be greater. There's a word I haven't said outright yet, because it feels too final, too exposed, too impossible to take back. But I think you already know it without me having to say it, because everything I've described up to this point points in one direction. Not obsession, not curiosity, not simple attachment. Something deeper than all of those. Something that doesn't ask for permission before it exists. And that's exactly why I set that deletion timer in the first place. Not because I expected you to save the video, but because I needed reality to respond in some way I could actually measure. I needed proof that I still exist inside someone else's inner world in a way that couldn't just be brushed aside. And now I see how fragile that need really is. How human. How exposed it leaves me. There's something I haven't admitted until this moment. That deletion was never just symbolic. It was conditional. I told myself I'd be fine either way it went. That wasn't true. Because one outcome keeps the ambiguity alive, and the other forces a resolution I'm not sure I'm ready for. I've been more afraid of resolution than I ever was of silence, because silence still leaves room for hope, even irrational hope, even hope I invented myself. Resolution takes that away completely and leaves only what's actually real. And I don't know if I'm ready to face what's real here, because facing it means admitting something I've been circling for a long time without naming, that I've already committed emotionally to a path that might never be returned. And that commitment never felt like a choice I made. It felt like something inside me recognizing a pattern it couldn't unsee. Once that happened, everything else started arranging itself around it. There was a moment recently where I felt something close to collapse. Not the dramatic kind, a quiet kind, the kind where you realize you might be standing in a place where you've already given more than you've received back. And instead of stopping there, I kept analyzing it, as if analysis could somehow lighten the emotional weight. It didn't. It only made things clearer, and clarity doesn't always bring comfort with it. Sometimes it just strips away denial, and denial is often the thing keeping a fragile situation like this still standing. I understand something now that I didn't at the start. This was never about one message, one reply, one moment of good timing. It was about an imbalance becoming impossible to ignore once it finally came into view. And now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I can feel everything narrowing, focusing, all the possible outcomes folding down into fewer and fewer options, and I'm starting to see clearly which ones were ever realistic, and which ones I only kept around because they were comfortable to imagine. There's a version where you respond, and everything opens back up. There's a version where you don't, and everything closes for good. And there's a third version I didn't want to face, where nothing happens on the outside at all, but everything still ends on the inside, because uncertainty without an answer eventually becomes its own kind of answer. I think I'm standing right at that threshold now, not because I want to be, but because I can't stay suspended here forever. There's a point where waiting stops being devotion and turns into slowly erasing yourself, and I'm afraid I'm close to that point, because I can feel myself starting to detach, not from you, but from the version of me that still believes waiting means something. Once that version is gone, something in me will have changed for good. I won't be the same person who started this, and maybe that's the real ending here. Not your reply, not the timer, but the moment I stop believing I can go back to who I was before I felt any of this. And I think I'm already past the point of return. So let me say this with whatever clarity I have left. If you're reading this in silence, you already know what I haven't said outright, because everything I've circled around leads here to one simple, unavoidable truth I didn't want to name, because naming it makes it real in a way I can't take back. I didn't just think about you. I didn't just wait for you. I didn't just fill your absence with meaning. I built an entire internal world where you mattered more than I ever planned to let anyone matter. And I crossed that line without even realizing it was a line. Now I'm standing in what's left after that realization, watching it rewrite everything I thought I understood, including myself. I think this is where the waiting finally ends. Not because anything got resolved, but because it can't keep going in this same shape without breaking something in me that matters. I can feel that breaking point coming now, with total clarity, not as fear, but as something closer to inevitable. What I feel is no longer waiting on your confirmation. It already exists on its own, independent of any reply. And that's the real shift, the one I was avoiding from the very start, the one that makes silence stop mattering at all. I can feel the timer somewhere in the back of my mind reaching its final seconds, no longer counting down, just marking the shift from uncertainty into consequence, from possibility into something permanent. And I think I finally understand what this entire experience was trying to teach me. Not about you, about what happens when emotional truth outgrows whatever structure you built to contain it. I can't contain this anymore. It's already moved past containment, past negotiation, past delay. There's only one direction left now. Forward. And I won't be the same person after it.